The Weber Workshop's HG-2 is a fascinating grinder because you don't even need to know what it is. It just kind of sucks you in to looking at it more with the presence that it has. And it's got this very intuitive look. You can see that it's this manual thing that you're meant to crank around with your hands. And when you realize it's a coffee grinder, you look up the price and you think, okay, I was expecting it to be expensive, but you know, $16.50 to $17.50 depending on the finish. That's a big chunk of coin for a coffee grinder. You know, you may not even have realized that coffee grinders could even be that expensive, let alone a manual coffee grinder that's not even electric. And then one of two things tends to happen. You either scoff at it and you think, oh, that's just ridiculous. Anyone who would buy something like that is just over the top. You know, I could spend way less money than that and get a fantastic cup of coffee. This thing is just ostentatious for the sake of it. Or you fall into the trap of kind of getting sucked into the romance of this thing and you think, man, if I could just get that thing, my coffee must go to the absolute pinnacle because just look at it. And the truth is the grinder does make great coffee. We're going to make some coffee with it. But if you end up getting one of these things, all of the factors that go into making that decision are just a lot more complicated than just that. We'll get into it, but first I need a cup of coffee. This HG-2 is the silver one. It was sent to me on loan from Weber Workshops, and just a really quick overview on how it works. This piece down here is called the Magic Tumbler. This is pretty cool actually. It's got this center that kind of pulls out so the coffee can fall down into whatever you're brewing into. It ships with a lid now, which is really nice. It's all magnetic, very satisfying, and most of the time, just so I don't have to worry about storing the lid, I just keep it under there like that. It also magnetizes into the center there. And then when I go to use it, I just take the lid off and stick it under there. It has this big handle right here, which is pretty obvious. You meant to put your hand here, and then this other handle on this wheel right here. Everything is very heavy metal and it just kind of feels like you want to walk up to play with it, and it's very satisfying to do so, to be totally honest. And this is kind of cool. This little wood end to the handle here actually pulls out, and it's a little cleaning brush in here, so you can kind of clean the grinder off, and then when you're all done, you just slide this little copper sleeve over it, tuck the brush back in there, and then when you pull it out, the sleeve will be pushed down. It's a nice little touch, kind of clever. In here, up at the top, there is a 2-speed gearbox that you can control with this lever right here. The first gear up here does 1/2 revolution for every turn of the crank, and second gear is basically a 1-to-1 ratio. Right here, there's a dust cover that kind of slides up and can magnetize to the underside of the gearbox. The dust cover also breaks in half magnetically, so you can store it if you don't want to use it. I use it most of the time. And then there is a selection ring right here that kind of pops up, and then you can turn it to whatever grind setting you want, and then you push it back down. That's called a stepped setup, meaning there's different settings that you can lock into. We'll talk more about that. And the burrs inside here that actually do the grinding of the beans, these are these massive 83mm Italian cutting burrs made by Matzer. They're a conical burr, and we will get into more how they taste. Now, before we get into any of my more, let's say, controversial takes about this grinder, let's make some coffee. Now I have a Brazilian natural here that I'm going to brew as espresso, and I've reviewed several hand grinders before that have a focus on espresso, and I just have to be honest, I don't really like hand grinding for espresso. I find it tedious, it's hard work, it's not typically very enjoyable. There are people out there who disagree with me. Regardless, I find this grinder is the exception. Now I'm gonna give just one delicate spritz of water here onto the coffee, and then I'm going to dose it into the bean feeder here, and I'm gonna set this back into first gear, and then I'm gonna drop the dust cap, and I'm just gonna give a slow, methodical grind. Takes about 25-30 seconds to grind an 18-gram shot of espresso in my experience. It can move around a little bit, even though it is quite heavy at like 22 pounds. And it looks easy on video, but when you're cranking it, it still does feel like work. It just is very nice to use. I will say it is a lot more enjoyable to use than pretty nearly any other hand grinder on espresso. All right, so once I am fully ground up, I am going to put the lid on this thing, and I'm going to give it a little shake. And I do find that this is a really helpful step when it comes to using this grinder and this Burr set in particular. We'll come back to that. All right, now this is kind of cool. So the Magic Tumbler fits right on top of a 58mm portafilter. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the lid off here and I'm gonna pull the center out. Just give it a little ding inside there like you're ringing a bell. And then I'm gonna give this a little shimmy just like that. And then when you pull the top off, you have pretty good distribution. So let's pull this and see how we did. All right, let's give this a taste. Smells great. Now that is a really good shot of espresso. This is a natural Brazilian coffee from Fazenda Santa Monica that we actually roasted through our roastery project. I'll leave some more info on that in the description. Is there anything magical about this really good espresso shot? No, it's a really good espresso shot. Now, a lot of that has to do with the burrs inside, and I actually really like this burr profile. It's the same one as is in the Weber key back there. It's that 83mm conical burr from Matzer, and it is a very unique burr in my experience. It's extremely bimodal, which means it's going to have two peaks in the distribution curve of different particle sizes. Larger ones called boulders, which are a bit bigger, and then smaller little tiny itty bitty particles called fines. And if you feel the grinds from this grinder in your hand, they'll actually feel a lot more grainy and gritty than you might expect from an espresso grinder. And that's because of that extremely bimodal profile, which is actually the opposite of what you would see in very high clarity flat burr grinder profiles. You would see a very uniform grind size, and that will provide a very crisp presentation of the acidity, a lot of flavor separation between those different flavor notes. A grinder like this is going to give a much more blended and complex profile. It also makes espresso a lot easier to dial in. Some of those high clarity grinders can actually be really finicky to find the sweet spot. You can end up with bad, 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 bad. And then in this very tiny little narrow range, you'll have a great shot and then bad. And a grinder like this, I find that I get excellent blend, excellent complexity, and pretty nearly, even if it doesn't pull exactly the way I want, you're getting a really good shot or a good filter coffee on the first round. And one of the more unique things about this Burr set is it does give you a lot of those advantages of a conical burr without having that big, sometimes overbearing, thick, gooey, heavy body that can sometimes come with an espresso shot. It is a lighter body shot, very, I would say, silky rather than syrupy. It's a little lighter, and it almost even edges on a more blended flat burr profile in that way. The result is dial in on easy mode, and when you pull a shot or make a filter coffee out of this thing, it's generally going to be very flattering and usually a great result. Now, if you are doing filter coffee with this, I found the brews, because of that bimodal presentation, on the brew recipe, it tended to benefit from lower agitation recipes, again, resulting in a very nice, complex, balanced cup of coffee. Now, before I get to some of the stuff that I really want to talk about with this grinder, I'm going to rapid fire through some tech stuff. Retention, which is basically the amount of coffee that is retained in here and could actually just sit in there and then make it out into your next dose, is basically zero with this grinder, so that's fantastic. Volume, however it comes through on camera, this is a very quiet grinder coming in at about 70 dB, so that is extremely quiet compared to basically any electric grinder. Let's talk about this gearbox for a sec. On espresso, I am basically hanging out in first gear all the time. And the reason for that is, for the coffees that I like, grinding in second gear, which is a 1-to-1, I just find it's too hard. You know, you're really cranking it, and the wheel, you need to kind of backtrack and really crank it to kind of get it going again. I tend to drink more medium to light roasted coffees. If you go dark enough, you can absolutely kick it into second gear and grind out an espresso. That's a little bit darker than I tend to go with my coffees. Filter, though, on the gearbox is very interesting. You're grinding coarser, so it goes faster. And I found I could do it in either first or second gear quite easily with even lightly roasted coffees. And whether or not I enjoyed it more on first or second gear on filter actually depended on the coffee. So for decaf, for example, for whatever reason, I find that with a lower density coffee, I like the higher speed of the burr results in a more nicely balanced cup of coffee in the end. Very light roast, dense beans, I found I would get a clearer presentation of the acidity with the first gear engaged a slightly lower RPM. So if you end up with one of these things, I think just play with the gearbox and see what results you like better. Weber also ships something called a magic wiper with this, designed to kind of wipe any static off the bottom of the burr and kind of mix up the grinds in the tumbler here. I prefer just using RDT and a shake personally, but some people do like that. If you do go too heavy on RDT, you will have some beans sticking in the hopper up here. So you really do need to kind of sit back and give it a light spritz, and then you should be good. I found that going back between filter and espresso tended to be a full revolution or just over. So that can be a little bit of a tedious process if you're flipping back and forth all the time. And when you are adjusting finer, sometimes the burrs will bind with like a coarse particle kind of stuck in there, and you'll need to give it like a little turn of the handle just to dislodge whatever little ground might be stuck in there. I also found that for whatever reason, this grinder really benefits from shaking and distributing the grounds. And I think it has something to do with the way that boulders and fines tend to fall into this tumbler. It's more obvious on filter settings, but when you take this off, when you grind on filter, you can actually look in there and see a bunch of boulders kind of hanging out around the bottom. And then as you go up the walls, you'll see more fine particles hanging out there. It's not a very even distribution, even within the tumbler itself. So I found when you shake it, and then you look at it again, everything is nicely homogenized in there, and your brews tend to be a lot more predictable on both espresso and filter. This one is obvious, I would think, but it's kind of tall. You know, it's about 17 inches tall. So depending on where you want to put it, it might not actually go very well in your space. I don't actually have room for it over here by the espresso machine. It just doesn't work in that spot. Same if you have somewhere like under a cabinet that you want to put it. It's just a big grinder. So you got to give it the room that it needs. Not going to work for everybody. Popcorning with it can definitely be an issue. You know, if you're grinding, especially if it's a dense bean and you're getting to the end there, you can get one or two beans kind of popping out of here if you don't use the dust cap. So I tend to use that most of the time. And alignment is something that I get asked about a lot with this grinder. And in my experience, both this one and the Weber Key, which use the same burr, came with excellent alignment from the factory. No issues there. They do a pretty meticulous alignment there in Taiwan where they make these things. And these ones are supported by both bearing up here in the gearbox as well as a bearing down here below, kind of around this bean feeder here. So we have a really delicious blended profile on both espresso and filter. You get a little bit more of the body of a blended flat burr profile while maintaining a lot of the advantages of a conical as far as ease of dial in and that sort of thing goes. Fantastic package from a look and feel standpoint. Obviously, Weber is tops with this stuff, as well as some compromises or maybe even, let's just say, accommodations in the workflow. You know, you have to be mindful of how you're doing the RDT. You don't want to do too much. Loading the beans here in the funnel can be a little bit awkward depending on what you're using. You have the size, you know, depending on what you're doing, you might need to shake. It definitely has a way that it likes to be used, let's say. So the question you have to ask is, at $16.50 to $70.50, is this grinder peak value when it comes to hand grinders? It's a lot of money, a lot more than other hand grinders. Is it giving you that relative amount of value back? And I'm going to say that if all you care about is maximizing your quality in the cup for the lowest amount of dollar value, I'm going to say no, it doesn't. It provides an excellent cup of coffee, very unique profile, really enjoyable to drink and use, but you can get great results from other grinders at a lower cost. If you're going to do something like this, there needs to be something else in it for you that gives that value. What is that? One obvious thing is if you want this specific burr in a hand grinder, there are very limited options out there. But I think the size of the group of people actually looking for that is really a small number. There are a couple other angles from my perspective, and one of the top ones is probably just the experience of using this grinder. You walk up to it, it's intuitive how you're supposed to use it, and doing so just creates this nice little moment. It's very tactile, very intuitive, very pleasing to do physically, and it just is an experience using it. And not everybody is going to find value in that, and that is fine. Today I use this on my espresso machine back there. Most of the time I don't actually do that. I did it today because I'm on camera, I'm shooting a video here, and I got a lot of stuff going on, but most of the time when I use this grinder, it's in a very slow, relaxed moment where I just want to be present in the moment with my cup of coffee. One of my favorite times to use it is after the kids are in bed. I'll get out a really nice decaf, I'll pull down the Weber Bird, and I'll just very slowly and methodically make myself a nice cup of decaf. Or when the house is quiet in the middle of the day, the kids are at school, I feel like I want a shot of espresso to brighten my day, I will again slowly get the Cafe Lot robot out and just calmly and methodically pull a shot of espresso using this thing. And a big part of that is the frame of mind it puts you in. Again, not everybody's going to find monetary value in that. Some people will. Now, beyond that, there's also its complexity and longevity. It's a very simple device that is over-engineered. So it's designed to last for a long time. It's not going to wear out. You're not going to need to replace it. When Weber designs products, they very often are designed to last for the lifetime of the user. They want you to hang on to these things for a long time and enjoy using them for a very long time. As sad as it is, that can be hard to find in today's landscape. There's also the obvious vibe factor. It's a vibe. There's no way around it. It's sitting on your bar. It has a presence. It's almost magnetically pulling people towards it. When we have friends over, it's one of the first things they notice. They're like, oh, what is that thing? That looks like really cool. This is a coffee grinder that gets noticed and has its own presence. And then lastly, one of my favorite things about Weber workshops, actually, and I really think that they underplay this. Weber is almost ruthlessly committed to sustainable and socially conscious manufacturing. There's no plastic in this, but it goes way beyond that. Weber hand makes all of these things at their factory in Taiwan. They don't farm out their manufacturing to the lowest bidder in whatever factory they can find in whatever country. They make sure that all of their workers are not just fairly treated, but they're happy and healthy. They know where absolutely every component of their products are sourced from. I asked about their aluminum, where they got it. And they basically said that they know a guy in central Taiwan who makes aluminum ingots at a very high quality. He used to do high-end bicycles. It's a personal relationship. He makes the raw material. They extrude it and mill it in their factory. There is no mystery as to where it comes from. And basically anytime I ask Weber about any one of their components, they have an answer. I asked about the springs in their tamper, and they're sourced and manufactured in Taiwan. They even said, in the future, we have a contact in Malaysia. We may do it there, but for right now, all of our springs in these tampers are made in Taiwan. They know exactly where the things are coming from. The leather here on the bottom is a base Italian leather. It is cut and processed in Taiwan as well. I review a lot of stuff, and as a matter of course of my due diligence, I always ask about manufacturing and sustainability, of how the product gets made. And very often the answers that I get back are very vague, and I have to kind of dig for more information. That isn't the case with Weber Workshops. They are doing more than nearly any other company that I've come across to ensure transparency and sustainability across the entire product chain. And as far as when Sarah and I are looking at what products we want to bring into our lives personally, sustainability and transparency of manufacture actually rank pretty high for us. So we have a great hand grinder, very expensive, very unique and tasty profile in the cup. Huge vibe, obviously, just look at it. A joy to use. Some quirks in the workflow, and very thoughtfully designed and manufactured. Is this hand grinder worth its price tag? And I think that actually depends on what you value. And I would actually love to hear from you. Would you say, I actually would just buy it just for that Burr profile at that price? Or would you say, when you add in some of those other factors that it has going for it, I can see it adding up to that price tag? Or would you say, nope, that is totally ridiculous. I think you're off your rocker. Whatever you think, I would love to hear from you in the comments on this one. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.